Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in, listening, downloading, streaming, however it is that you got here. This is episode number 5 of Just the Worst podcast. I'm your host, Billy Donnelly, who you can find over at thisisinfamous.com as well as joeblow.com, and of course here at Just the Worst podcast. And on this show, as we like to do week in and week out, we like to break down, analyze, and put into context the biggest events, happenings, and occurrences in the world of movies and Hollywood. And that's how we like to do it, and that's what the show is built on. So we'll waste no further time, get right into all the big occurrences that went down this past week, because there were a pretty sizable amount. A lot of it slotted over at Disney, so I'm just going to jump right into it and fill you in on what's been going on. Let's start over, I guess, with Disney in the Marvel Studios brand. A couple of announcements that Marvel made. Number one, inserting a brand new film into their Phase 3 lineup leading into Avengers Infinity War in 2019 and 2020. Ant-Man 2 has essentially now been thrown into the mix. Originally, Ant-Man, the first Ant-Man, was kind of just seen as this standalone, interesting entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Long been developed by Edgar Wright for a number of years. It was kind of just seen as this weird, quirky, sort of comedic superhero movie that was going to pull from a character that Wright had loved and been interested in for quite some time. Wasn't really meant to be a larger part of some sort of Marvel Cinematic Universe, some type of crossover franchise. Just was kind of going to be its own thing. Just a thing that fans might think were cool, that people might think were cool in the realm of comic book movies, in the realm of superhero movies, and also in the realm of Edgar Wright movies. And as the Marvel machine grew and grew and grew and got bigger and larger, and a Marvel Cinematic Universe actually became a thing, it really became difficult for Ant-Man to just be its own thing, its own separate entity, kind of a one-off that didn't exist in the greater context of what Marvel was building. Excuse me, sorry about that. A little bit under the weather, so I'm battling through that here as we do the show. So maybe it's some throat clearing, may get some sniffles here or there, but we'll power through it together. As I got my trusty water here to try and ease the pain of doing the full show for you. No pain at all. Always a pleasure. But sorry, before my vocal cords and larynx decided to flare up on me there. The key to that was that Wright really just wanted to make this its own thing, and once everything started rolling and snowballed into this larger entity, that really seemed to no longer be a viable option for Marvel. And that kind of feeds into why Edgar Wright ultimately departed, was that they started to play projects like Ant-Man safer. Didn't want them to be risky, or they wanted them to be a little bit more formulaic, fit into the context of just everything they were piecing together, everything that they were putting together, everything that had now gotten them to the dance, that had made a Marvel film such a desirable entity at the box office, and made a real moneymaker for Marvel Studios. So, you started hearing rumblings of Marvel wanting to incorporate some of those crossover elements into Ant-Man, starting to have it function as a larger piece of the MCU, having it become integrated into everything it is that they were doing, and use Ant-Man as a tool to once again build forward, build to the next film, build to the films after that, and make Ant-Man not its own thing, but just another branch of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So the film did pretty well for Marvel Studios. Typically, what entry-level origin superhero films have done for them, kind of on par with where Captain America started, where Thor started. Little less as far as name recognition in comparison to those other superheroes. But let's remember, like, they had to start somewhere. They were far from surefire properties when Marvel was building this. Same with Iron Man. They're not Batman, they're not Superman, they're not Spider-Man, they're not on that level. So it took a little bit of having a jumping off point for the mainstream audiences to see what these characters were all about, and then decide whether or not they were going to continue on with them. And as we've seen, they have. They've embraced them fully. They've embraced the MCU fully. This thing is a remarkable monster. And as a result, Ant-Man was once again a jumping off point. It was a start to have the public see who exactly Ant-Man is. And, unlike Thor or Captain America, Ant-Man wasn't given the luxury of an origin story. There was somewhat of an origin story factored in and unveiled along the way, but it wasn't at its core an origin story or conventional origin story that we had seen with those other heroes, those other properties. So Ant-Man did pretty well for them, and once again you have Paul Rudd at the center of this. You have Evangeline Lilly really becoming a major part, and you see a future teased in the post-credit sequence as far as what Ant-Man could lead to moving forward if Marvel ultimately chose to take that path and explore this a little bit further. So what we wind up with now is Marvel announcing that they will be moving ahead with an Ant-Man sequel. However, this will not just be Ant-Man 2. This will be Ant-Man and the Wasp. So now we are adding in the Wasp character. We are giving Evangeline Lilly much more to do. She's now being put in the title as opposed to just being seen as a secondary or supporting female sidekick. And what I imagine is she will wind up being on somewhat equal footing with Paul Rudd's Scott Lang for this follow-up that has surprisingly gotten a 2018 date, July 6th, no less. So they're looking to slot this right around 4th of July weekend in 2018. And then proceeded to bump Black Panther up earlier in the year, as that had originally been slated for that July 6, 2018 release date. It's now been moved up to February 16th of the same year, Black History Month, which may actually work in its favor promotionally, as now you're looking at a major black superhero being released in February. It just seems like the stars are aligned there for things to take off there for Marvel, and for Marvel to try and take advantage of that connection. And now you also have the Wasp as a top-line female superhero, or a superheroine of sorts, leapfrogging Captain Marvel as the first female superhero in Marvel's cinematic universe. At least top-lining it. I mean, granted, Black Widow has been around, and Captain Marvel will somehow be involved. We also have the Scarlet Witch, but the Wasp will be the first character we get who is actually top-lining a Marvel film. So in that respect, very cool. Very cool that the Wasp will become such a major factor in the advancement of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and also will play such a key component in the future of the Ant-Man leg of the MCU. That this won't just be Ant-Man by himself, or with the Wasp just once again kind of being a lower or a lesser element in the film. Now they have equal billing, equal responsibility, and it's a cool thing to see moving forward that finally, perhaps, Marvel will embrace the female characters that they have within, and who knows? 2018, maybe, finally, Disney and Marvel will move forward together in creating a Wasp action figure, so that there, for once, will be a female superhero toy for people to be able to buy. So that, in a respect, is pretty cool. In addition to what was going on with Marvel and their dates, a bit of a shake-up schedule over with Disney as well, as far as their future calendar dates and their slates. Once again, now shooting all the way up through like 2020. It's ridiculous that we have studios who are continuing to drop and plant their flags in the calendar for movies that are going to be 5 years in advance. 5 years. And here what we have with Disney is releasing their dates for a few animated features that are coming out of Pixar, and then also just setting dates for untitled movies and what looks to be movies that don't even seem to be fully formed as far as what they're going to be. So let's deal with the Pixar stuff first. Bit of a Disney shakeup there. Cars 3 has been dated as if anyone was really waiting for that sequel to come along. So Cars 3 is going to be June 16th, 2017. That actually now pushes back Toy Story 4, which was slated for that time in June 2017. And has now been moved to 2018, June 15th, 2018, before we get now the fourth entry in the Toy Story series. And then The Incredibles 2 has now officially gotten a date with June 21st, 2019 coming in order for finally that sequel to take its footing. Long-awaited sequel. The fact that it's taken this long to get Incredibles 2, and in the meantime we are now up on 3 Cars movies, is astounding to me. So, yeah, that's actually happening. And then Disney also set in motion dates that I'm not going to get into because, once again, there's no actual film attached to them. But for no less than 4, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 live-action fairy tale movies that go all the way up through into 2020. And there's a number of things that are in development. They have a live-action Cruella de Vil movie, Tim Burton's Dumbo, a live-action Mulan, Reese Witherspoon as Tinkerbell, a Genie prequel movie that's based in Aladdin, a Maleficent sequel, There's still that other Alice in Wonderland sequel. There's a number of things that are still in the works and coming. And as a result, it's very difficult to know exactly what is going to go where. And very difficult to really kind of predict at some point where any of these films are going to slot. I know that they're working on them. There's an Enchanted sequel that they're trying to get up and running. So there's a number of these films that they still don't know where they're going to go. There's a lot of films that they could just add into the schedule as well. But no less than 4 live-action fairy tale movies, and these are the ones Disney's doing them fairly well. And I wasn't really a fan of. I mean, I wouldn't say fairly well. Box office-wise, they're doing fairly well. I mean, they're going bananas at the box office, whether you look at Oz the Great and Powerful, or Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland, or the Maleficent movie. These movies are showing up in gangbusters at the box office. People are actually gravitating towards them, supporting them, and really enjoying them. The only one that I kind of dug was the Cinderella one. I thought that was actually pretty well made. But beyond that, they haven't really done anything for me. The Jungle Book interests me. I think Favreau's The Jungle Book interests me as far as taking kind of this live-action CGI hybrid. And that's one that I think people are interested because it looks different. It's at least something done with the Jungle Book that's unique, that we haven't seen before. I mean, we've seen the story before, but we haven't seen it done in this particular way. But beyond that, Cruella de Vil we've already seen with those live-action 101 Dalmatian movies. I don't know that a live-action Tinkerbell is really going to do it for people. The Dumbo film from Burton is at least an interesting concept. I don't know whether or not he's going to be able to execute it, but at least it'll be something unlike anything you've ever seen. To watch Dumbo done in a live-action way, that at least has a novelty aspect to it, where you're like, well, I'm curious to see this at least. So, but this is what Disney's banking on right now. This is something that they have at their disposal. They have all these properties that they've built up and have made valuable over the years. And now, rather than kind of regurgitating the originals, and believe me, the Blu-ray releases and the Disney Vault and whatnot has done financial wonders for them over the years. Now they need to find a new stream of revenue to keep going in these live action films. That's the way to go. Let's jump right back to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, though, because that was the other big story, one of the other big stories this week. And that had to do with Thor Ragnarok and the presence of the Hulk. Over at JoeBlow.com, my main man, Paul Shirey, broke the story and scooped that the next time we will actually see the Hulk, the return of the Hulk, will be in the third Thor film, Thor Ragnarok, where he'll play a key player in that film. As we know, in Avengers Age of Ultron, the Hulk kind of goes radio silence while he's flying solo in the Quinjet, and it's kind of left open-ended as to where the Hulk might turn up next, or where he may be going, what the plan for the Hulk is. Now, of course, there were rumors for quite some time about Planet Hulk and World War Hulk being steps in the direction that Marvel might be taking creatively as it stands with Bruce Banner and the Hulk. Marvel continues to say that's not what we're doing, and it seems to me that Marvel has really made no indications that that is what they may be doing. There are some hints. He kind of, I think, looks up into the sky towards the end while he's flying solo in the Quinjet, and that's supposed to make you believe that this world cannot handle him. Maybe another world somewhere in outer space, in another realm, another location somewhere outside of Earth, maybe better suited to handling the Hulk. But once again, there's no real distinct or definite answer given as to the future of the Hulk. James Gunn has said that he will not turn up in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Once again, Marvel has said there will not be Planet Hulk and World War Hulk. And it seems that if he's going to show up anywhere, it may be in Asgard or any of those other realms that the Asgardians need to keep an eye on as part of whatever this big monumental occasion is that's going to go down in the third Thor film. And look, you have Loki standing in for Odin this entire time. Bad shit's clearly going to go down. The Thor films have been, I think, weaker story-wise than some of the other threads in the MCU. I'm a big fan of the first Thor. I like kind of the Shakespearean aspect of the brothers feuding for control of the throne, and kind of Thor's immaturity that he must overcome in order to show himself to be capable of emerging as a true king down the line. Thor: The Dark World, though, I think is horrendous from beginning to end. I don't think there's much good in it at all, other than Hemsworth, of course, who's good. I felt like even Hiddleston was kind of crammed in there in order to give the fans their nod for how much they love Loki at that point. But beyond that, Thor: The Dark World is pretty awful. And I would like to see them recover, because I think Hemsworth is really been underserved as Thor, and that even goes through the Avengers films. Avengers: Age of Ultron, he was just kind of a background player, which is a shame because I think he's so good in the role. So kind of giving him the aid of the Hulk, and kind of building off of that friction a little bit, that dynamic as to who might be better, that was kind of built in the first Avengers film, I think might be interesting. And once again, the Hulk is, I don't know that the Hulk is capable of carrying an entire film by himself anymore. We did Ang Lee's Hulk film. We did the Incredible Hulk as well. And, they tried to work with it. But the Hulk is best when he can come in, do what he does best, and then leave. Because, I think the Banner story of, fighting against the nature of who he is now, as well as, trying to fight for a cure, to try and hold back the Hulk. I think some of that has been done to death. Even just going back to the Bixby Ferrigno TV series, I think it's just been done to death. I don't know that there's new area to really explore too much with the Hulk and Banner, unless you start getting crazier and you start getting into World War Hulk and Planet Hulk and stories of that nature, where the Hulk is allowed to become a character in and of itself, rather than just a smasher, just a destroyer of things, because you can't have a 2-hour action film that just built around the Hulk, fucking shit up. So in that respect, kind of moving the Hulk in, with Thor for the third Thor film, I think is smart. Much in the same way that Black Widow kind of getting half of Captain America: The Winter Soldier was smart, in that it didn't require a full film to be devoted to this character, but enough of a film was devoted to them to give you a better understanding and a better sense of who they are and how they fit into this overall universe. So for that, the Hulk being in Thor Ragnarok, if that turns out to be true, sounds like an excellent piece of business for Marvel to do, and a pretty sound way to reincorporate the Hulk back into what it is that they were doing as they move through Phase 3 and build towards Avengers Infinity War, when obviously the Hulk will become a major part of that as well, once Thanos is on the scene. And that confrontation ultimately pays off, hopefully, for what Marvel's been building over the last decade. Other sequel news, dealing with Mad Max. George Miller was asked about Charlize Theron and the return of Furiosa in the Mad Max sequels. So right now, there are apparently 2 Mad Max sequels being developed between George Miller and Warner Brothers. They have scripts for 2. They're in conversations as far as which one they may actually do next, and then figure they'd like to do them both, but I think right now it's just a matter of which one are we going to do first. And George Miller, of course, was asked about Furiosa. Charlize Theron owned it in Mad Max Fury Road, and it is a strong female character that we don't get, a strong heroic female character that we don't get too often, particularly in Hollywood blockbusters as well as in action flicks. So you can understand the love for this particular character because it's different for all the wrong and right reasons. Wrong being that because we don't get so many of them. Right for being like this is what female characters are capable of when they're given this particular responsibility in a film. So anyway, Miller's asked about Furiosa's return, I believe by Digital Spy, and his response was, "I'm not sure" is the answer. She's not in the Mad Max story, the Mad Max sequel story, but in one of the stories there's an interaction between Max and Furiosa. I can't really say more than that because it's still in progress. And here's the thing with Furiosa and a Mad Max sequel. Yes, Charlize Theron was excellent as Furiosa in Mad Max Fury Road. Mad Max Fury Road is an excellent film, period. And by and large, you take those 2 properties and you say, well, I want the excellence to continue. This is what kind of where fans always get themselves in their own little bit of trouble, is that we see something that we like, and then that's the only thing we ever want. It's like you eat pizza and you're like, I love pizza. And then all you want for like 6 months is pizza every day, which I guess is fine on a certain level until you realize that you are malnourished and unhealthy. And the world has now changed itself to cater to your pizza addiction. It's okay to it's okay to like something, but liking it so much that then you drive it into the ground that its specialness wears away, that's not really the way to go. And look, I'm not trying to say that Charlize Theron as Furiosa is like a treat. I love the fact that George Miller put a female character in the type of role that is typically just given to another dude. I love that. And there is the feminist perspective here, which is we need to have more of that. There should absolutely be more of that going on in Hollywood. And I 100% agree. You will not find me disagreeing or arguing a point against that, saying no, this is the right amount, this is enough. We absolutely need more female representation. We absolutely need more female portrayals. We absolutely need more female characters that are built of this nature. But by that same token, that doesn't mean take the one that we've gotten that's been super solid and just keep reusing it. At this point, I would prefer George Miller creating new and different and more strong female characters that could be used in the Mad Max sequels, in Mad Max Wasteland, rather than recycling the one that is tried and true that we already know people like. It's okay to go outside the safety realm, outside of our warm, comfy, cozy spot, and create something new, something different, something entirely unique for us to once again embrace and love. A new wrinkle and a strong female heroine, a new take, a new vision, another character. Because in creating more characters, not like Furiosa, but who have commonality with Furiosa, that's how we get the ball rolling to these strong female characters not being just an anomaly in the Hollywood system, but being the norm, being a regular occurrence, being something that people aren't necessarily surprised by when they show up, but something people expect to a certain degree, and then also are disappointed when they aren't around, when filmmakers and storytellers don't call upon characters of that nature to help tell their stories. So I don't think using the same character over and over and over does a great deal in forwarding the cause of having more strong female characters, but I think using Furiosa as a template, as a launching pad, as a jumping off point to get more characters like that. That is ultimately the legacy of Charlize Theron, Furiosa, George Miller, and Mad Max Fury Road. Not to do the same thing and recycle the same ideas, but to take the initial ideas and use them as a way to create something new that, once again, people will embrace for kind of following that mindset, following that path of thinking, following that idea that strong female characters in movies of this nature are a blessing and a benefit and a strong, valuable asset, and not just, oh, well, that was different. Speaking of different, let's talk about the Hateful Eight and Quentin Tarantino's plan for his Western-type film, I guess. It's not really a Western. It's got some Western elements to it. But for his film that he's got coming out in at the end of the year, for right around Christmas in December. So he's got this roadshow type of plan for it, where in December 25th is when the release will hit. What Tarantino is going to do is he's going to have a 70 millimeter version of the film that the Weinstein Company is actually paying to install projectors around the country, around the United States, in order to be able to properly display the film in 70 millimeter. Obviously, not a lot of 70 millimeter projectors left, so they're going to have to go out of their way in order to make sure the technology is up and running for them to function in order to project and give this type of presentation to the film. So that's what they're looking to do. About 100 screens, I think, is what I've heard is the estimate. That's what they're hoping to roll out. So about 100 screens for the Hateful Eight. And what Tarantino, and then in January, once it goes wider, you'll just see sort of a regular presentation. So what Tarantino has now revealed his plan to be is that starting with the 70 millimeter cut, you're going to get a different version of the Hateful Eight than those who see it most likely digitally in January are going to get. So what you're going to wind up with is the 70 millimeter cut has an overture, there's an intermission, and it's also about 6 minutes longer. And the digital presentation will be a different cut. Tarantino says it's more, he tweaked it for that type of presentation. So these, what he calls these kind of longer, unblinking scenes have been reformatted. Essentially, you'll see the same type of film, but you're going to see a different edit. So you're going to see some shots that aren't there that might be shown to better take advantage of whether you're watching it at home, you're watching it on Netflix, you're watching it on Blu-ray, You're watching a digital presentation. You're not watching something that would full blown take advantage of the 70 millimeter. So rather than give you something that isn't really going to maximize the format, he has instead chosen to tweak it, putting forth two different presentations of essentially the same movie. But if you see it in 70 millimeter as he wants you to, you're going to get a different experience, I guess, than people who would see it in the regular presentation. Now, look, I'm all for this, provided that I am near to a place that gets one of these 100 screens that are going to be able to show it in 70 millimeter. The problem here is that by limiting this this roadshow aspect, especially at a time when with the internet, where you can tell everyone kind of what you got to see and what you didn't get to see, restricting who has access to these films. I think that's where the problems arise. There's some resentment factors, I guess, that start to creep in when you know people who see it in 70 millimeter. They want to tell you all about how they saw it in 70 millimeter, and yet you never had the opportunity to see it in 70 millimeter, whether it's your location, your geography, where you live, you just didn't have a chance to. But because it wasn't so widespread and accessible, you never got a chance to have that same experience than other people. That's the only knock I have on the different formats. I think it's very cool that Tarantino wanted to do 70 millimeter. I think it's very cool that he was committed to doing it, and I think it's very cool that the Weinstein Company is paying for it to be able to show it in that way. What I'm never a fan of is people being limited in the way that they can actually see a film of that nature. And by it only rolling out in 100 screens, I think the problem lies in people who would love to see it in 70 millimeter, who wish they could see it in 70 millimeter, but will never have the chance to see it in that way, and may feel slighted or gypped in some sense because of through no real fault of their own, but it could just be that's where they live. They live in a place that's nowhere near a spot that would give them the 70 millimeter presentation. So that's the only knock I could see on it. I wish everyone can do it, but unfortunately, that's not the way the theater and exhibitor system works anymore. Everything is now digital. Everything is DCP. And we're not seeing 35 millimeters. We're not seeing 70 millimeters. We're not seeing films shown in that way again. So for Tarantino to shoot it that way and want people to see it that way, it presents an interesting set of challenges and problems for fans who absolutely wish that they could see it that way too. So that's the interesting aspect that we learned with this week for Quentin Tarantino and the Hateful Eight. Another piece of business, though, to discuss, and that goes back to Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film. We've talked at length about that on the show, and the cameos that he's been able to set up, whether it's Bill Murray coming back, or Ernie Hudson coming back, or Dan Aykroyd coming back, or Andy Potts coming back, or Sigourney Weaver coming back. All of these people are coming back in one form or another to have a piece of this new chapter of the Ghostbusters lore, and in a way to also lend their support to it, to throw their weight behind it, to say, hey, look, it's not so bad because we're in it. That type of support for the Ghostbusters film. And the one person that I think people had been extremely curious about, because it had been very silent as to whether or not he would participate, was Rick Moranis. Now, Rick Moranis has kind of been out of the game for quite some time. Had the unfortunate tragedy of his wife dying of breast cancer a number of years ago, and as a result, kind of reprioritized his life. Took a step back from doing movies and other entertainment projects, and really just decided that he was going to put his family first and raise his kids away from the spotlight of Hollywood, and that would kind of be it. And there's a really fantastic piece in the Hollywood Reporter on where Rick Moranis has been, what he's been up to this whole time, whether or not he'd come back and do another film. Really, a really interesting read for those people who are like, whatever happened to that guy? So I recommend you just Google it or hit up to HollywoodReporter.com and check it out. For anybody who's ever been a fan of Rick Moranis, I think it's one that you gotta read. But he did comment on whether or not he would be taking part in Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film. And the simple answer to it is that he will not be. You will not find Rick Moranis appearing in any way, shape, or form in Paul Feig's Ghostbusters film next year. He won't be there, not in a cameo, not as Louis Tully, not as anybody. There will be no Rick Moranis. The longer answer is, this is his quote, where he said, but Ghostbusters didn't appeal to me. I wish them well. I hope it's terrific, but it just makes no sense to me. Why would I do just one day of shooting on something I did 30 years ago? And I can absolutely understand that mentality for why any of the original cast wouldn't take part in this film. Now, look, I'm not going to knock or fault anyone who has chosen to do it. You know, they came up with something interesting for Bill Murray to do. I'm sure they've come up with something interesting for Sigourney Weaver and Ernie Hudson and Annie Potts and Aykroyd to do. Something that it's a nice wink and a nod to the fans of the original Ghostbusters. But by that same token, if they looked at it and said, you know what? I don't really know that there's a reason for me to do it, considering that my involvement with the Ghostbusters is essentially come and gone, I can't fault them for that. I can't fault Rick Moranis for thinking that. For saying, hey, I would totally be game for doing something, but to just do a cameo for something that I was a part of a really long time ago, I'd rather hold out for something else. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Makes sense. And that's his prerogative. That doesn't mean everyone has to live by that standard or everyone has to follow that creed. But those who have, such as Rick Moranis, more power to him. He didn't find any sort of creative fulfillment in doing that. Okay. Once again, he's right there, though, saying, I wish them well. I hope it's terrific. He's not harboring any sort of ill will towards like, I can't believe they're even making this. He just said, for me, it didn't make sense. So we're not going to have Rick Moranis in Paul Feig's Ghostbusters. It sounds like we could get him in something else if the right project struck. That would be something I would look forward to. I'm not going to say I'm going to be disappointed that he's, one of the only original cast not in the new Ghostbusters. I know now why he just chosen not to be a part of it. I'm okay with it. And I wish him well in whatever may come down the pike for him Because I would love to see more Moranis do something, anything. It just is what it is. A couple other things came of note. Some more remake, reboot type of news. Ellen Page looks to be starring in Flatliners, a Flatliners remake. Also, Neil Cross, who's the creator of the BBC's Luther, looks to be penning the Escape from New York remake for MGM, I believe it is, with John Carpenter executive producing and somehow creatively involved. And also Nick Cassavetes got the gig writing and directing the Roadhouse remake that Ronda Rousey is going to be involved. And every time these things come up, people are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're remaking this." Oh my God! Listen, I think we're well beyond the point of outrage for any of these projects getting remade. For me, it's more of a surprise when things aren't getting remade. I'm like, "Oh, they haven't remade that yet. Oh, well, that's a surprise." As opposed to when they say, "Hey, we're going to remake Flatliners," and I'm like, "Nah, well, that figures." So all this outrage that seems to come up every time one of these films, like, just save it for something else, something that matters. Because, I mean, shit, if they were willing to remake Total Recall, which wasn't exactly like an untouchable before, like not even an untouchable, but just like something that demanded a remake, or something like Fright Night, like if those movies are getting remade, then movies that at one point were successful, like Flatliners and Escape from New York and Roadhouse, when they finally get the remake gauntlet dropped on them, just don't be outraged. Just look at it and be like, "Yeah, well, that figures," and move on, and hope that the result is something good. Something that you can then maybe watch and say, "Oh, okay, it's a good companion with the original." Not something that you hate on immediately, and then like when it's no good, you're just like, "Oh, see, I was right. I told you so." There's nothing wrong with rooting for these movies to be good, or quality, or entertainment. But just on the surface saying, "Oh, it's a remake. Fuck that." That's not the right path to take. Couple of things I wanted to talk about before we get out of here. I'll get into my just the worst in just a second. But what I did want to talk about was, and this isn't a news item. This is just something that I've come across over the past for a while. I've been waiting for a chance to speak about it, and I encountered it once again this past week on a couple of occasions, and as a result, I felt to use this format in order to talk about it, and that is issues with predictability in a movie. I see films all the time, I review films all the time. We have another podcast, Just the Worst Movie Review Podcast, where we use our critiques. We bring on another movie critic along with myself, and we critique and we discuss and we debate and we talk about the new film releases, and we go through the things that we like and we don't like. We critique the film. And too often what I find with a lot of people is that they will knock a film for being what they call, quote unquote, predictable. And I don't really think that's a fair criticism to levy against any film, is knowing how it ends. Knowing the path that it's going to take. Knowing some of the beats, some of the twists, some of the turns. Having a general sense of, I think it's going to go this way. Sometimes if it's going to go that way, that just means that it's good storytelling. Not every film or every story has to be unconventional. Not every film or every story has to surprise you. Not every film or every story has to blow you out of the water with doing something new. Sometimes it's enough for a film to just take you along for the ride, emotionally grab you with the journey that these characters are on. And that's it. The journey is just as important as the destination. Not every movie has to be a Shyamalan movie where you're like, oh shit, I never saw that coming. Plenty of movies we see where we see where it's going or what's coming. You don't watch like an Indiana Jones movie and be like, I wonder if the Nazis might win this time. You don't watch a Marvel movie and say, I think the villains might have it in the bag here. James Bond's been around over 50 years and you never really questioned whether or not James Bond was going to come out victorious at the end. So this idea that movies being predictable is a bad thing, most movies are predictable. Many of them are following tried and true formulas. And there's nothing wrong with a movie kind of being formulaic. It's when a movie feels formulaic. Like it feels like there's nothing to it. Like it feels like there's no passion or emotion or heart or soul put into it. It's when a movie feels mechanical that you can kind of knock going by the book. But I think it's unfair to a film to look at it and say, well, I figured it out early on, or I figured it out in the middle, and I was able to predict where it was going to go. So what? You were smarter than the movie? Is that what you're trying to say? Good for you. You want a medal? You're not going to get one. Sometimes it's okay to just sit back and let a movie do what it's going to do. And just go along for the ride. And if you enjoy the ride, awesome. If you don't, okay. But you don't get in a car and drive to the supermarket and go, that was a predictable drive. I knew where I was going the whole time. And now I'm disappointed. It's just a function of life, man. Sometimes the end of your journey is quite clear. Once you set out on it, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that that is what it is. And you should accept it and understand it and move on with it rather than knocking it for it just being functional and doing what it's supposed to do. All right, that was my 2 cents there. Let me move on to my just the worst piece of the week. And that would be this overblown story about Steven Spielberg directing Harrison Ford in an Indiana Jones 5. Last week, there were screenings around the country of Steven Spielberg's new film Bridge of Spies, and attached at the end there was a satellite Q&A with Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. Spielberg was asked about what it was like working with Tom Hanks. I believe that's their 4th movie together. And Spielberg just quickly remarked that Hanks was now tied with Harrison Ford. He had now made 4 movies with Hanks, 4 movies with Harrison Ford. They were tied. And now that meant he was probably just going to go off and make Indiana Jones 5 with Harrison Ford, so that would make 5 for him, and then he'd have to go make another movie with Hank so they could be tied once again, and then he would just put Daniel Day-Lewis and everything else that he made. So it was this innocuous kind of joke, like, oh, well, I'll just make this movie with him, and that'll be 5, and I'll make another one there, and that'll be 5, and it'll be tied, and whatever. And everybody went crazy. Oh, well, Steven Spielberg's going to make a movie, another Indiana Jones movie with Harrison Ford. He's probably not. Do you want to see that movie where Indiana Jones is like 80 years old? Probably not. And once again, he never said it as, this is something I'm committed to. Steven Spielberg is attached to like 7 other movies right now, and none of them are Indiana Jones 5. In fact, since Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, there hasn't even really been a peep about Indiana Jones 5. There was, well, maybe we could do another one and end it on another note. Probably because everybody knows the downer that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is, and they didn't want to leave that sour taste in everyone's mouth before Disney ultimately does something else. But that doesn't mean everybody was like, no, we have to make this movie. That's not how it works. Indiana Jones 5 with Spielberg and Harrison Ford and George Lucas involved is probably never going to happen. But this idea that everybody just took this very small, kind of joking remark and blew it up into this other larger thing, that is why, for this week, that particular piece of non-news, just the worst. Well, that does it. That's the show. So I want to thank you for making it all the way through here. This particular episode of Just the Worst podcast. Once again, this is episode number 5. And make sure you follow us on all the social media at JTW Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, at facebook.com/Just the Worst podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Infamous Kid, as well as on Facebook at facebook.com/Bully the Kid. I'm your host, Billy Donnelly. Make sure you read me regularly. You can find me at thisisinfamous.com, as well as joeblow.com. And we'll be back next week with another show, another episode, and I'm sure plenty of more news to put into context and discuss for next week. So I'm out. Make sure you listen to us on SoundCloud. And we'll be back next week. Make sure you come back and listen. See you later. Peace. Just the Worst Podcast, episode number 5, has been a presentation of Just the Worst Podcast Media.